Throughout his career, Kazuo Ishiguro has won numerous awards, published numerous novels and screenplays, and seen 2 of his books made into films. He's now back with his first novel in a decade, and so joining us now to reflect on his work is author Kazuo Ishiguro, most recently the author of the book, The Buried Giant. Hi again.
Hello again.
Okay, let's pick up a little bit where we left off last night and still talking about your latest novel, the first in a decade. So the book, The Buried Giant, is set in pre-medieval Britain. The Remains of the Day, another one of your books, well known, was set in the years leading up to the Second World War. And I'm wondering, how do you match up the right historical period with the sort of emotional situation that you need in order to say what you want to say?
Well, I find that process very difficult. Part of the reason it takes me a long time sometimes to write a book is because I don't have the setting. That sounds like a crazy problem. I mean, I know some writers, that's the first thing they choose. You know, they want to write something, set in the Second World War or whatever, in Vietnam, something. I often don't have the setting. I mean, this is an honest problem for me. I often have the story worked out because I work out almost like I work out the relationships, I work out the emotions, that will bring out the theme, the questions that I want in my book. And then I have to kind of put it down somewhere, I go location hunting for some setting. And that's what often takes me a long, long time. So a book like Never Let Me Go, I tried it twice before I actually eventually wrote it. In the 90s, I tried it twice. The third time I attempted it, around 2001, I put it down in this kind of sci-fi-ish dystopian world. And that's what enabled me to do it. Until I thought of this kind of cloning, organ donation idea, I couldn't get the story to work. And so there's often some kind of final piece of the jigsaw which has to do with often not just the historical setting, but if you like, the literary setting, the genre, if you like. Until I can find that, I often can't actually get my books to fly.
Right.
And that was the case with this one too. Part of the reason it took me a long time was that, as I said to you yesterday, I mean, at the beginning I was drawn towards real historical situations in recent history of communities in conflict. And it took me a while to try and find some place that was neutral. I did actually entertain the idea of galaxy far away. There's always that solution. But I guess the problem for me is, there's often something I need slightly odd to happen to get my story to work. In this particular case, I needed some situation where everybody in the country was suffering from some kind of selective amnesia. So how do I bring that about? So a dystopian setting is one kind of solution. There's some sort of weird power, that's a dictatorship, and that's doing this through scientific means. But I thought actually it would be quite fun to go way, way back into the past and use myth and fantasy. Right. Use a kind of a slightly magical mist.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up the genres because Never Let Me Go was classified as science fiction. This book, The Buried Giant, is being, I guess if I went to a store, it would be sold under fantasy. Do you like those labels, or do you find them limiting? Where do you come in on this?
I don't particularly like labels. And I don't like labels as a reader, and I don't like labels as a writer. And when I'm writing, I don't try to think of these labels at all. And in fact, perhaps naively, I didn't think of the fantasy label at all. When I was writing The Buried Giant, I mean, because I'm like somebody just trying to make something. I'm like one of those guys before airplanes were invented, properly, who trying to make a flying machine in my backyard, and I'm just kind of doing my best. I have no prototype, and it might look really strange. I don't quite know what it would look like at the end. I just need it to fly, and at the end, I make something I think it more or less flies, and someone looking at it will say, "Oh, that looks really strange. That looks like a flying dinosaur. That looks like that looks like a boat with wings or something." But I don't really see it as that. You know, I've been kind of desperately trying to get this machine to fly. And it's only after the fact that people say, oh, is this a sci-fi book? Is this a fantasy book? I mean, yes, I've got those elements in it, but I like the idea that, you know, writers should be able to use anything they want, you know, without prejudice from readers or kind of...
Or genreists.
Yeah, genreists, yeah. I don't like any kind of imagination police looking over my shoulder when I'm writing, and I don't like imagination police when I'm reading. You know, I don't like kind of snobbery and about genres. You know, I don't like people trying to create a hierarchy about genres, saying some genres are more worthy or more literary than others. In fact, I think we're at the moment, I sense we're at quite an interesting and exciting time in our reading culture, because I think all these things are breaking down. Mm-hmm. Now, I think the barrier between what used to be called popular fiction and serious fiction is breaking down. I think the walls between so-called genres are breaking down. You know, fantasy, science fiction, literary fiction, detective fiction, everything is merging. Particularly the younger generation of writers and readers, you know, are quite free and unprejudiced about mixing these things. And I think in the end, genre is something that's not that. It's not that profound in a literary sense. I think it's basically a marketing tool that's put on by the book industry and the movie industry, whoever it is, you know, to help market certain products in a simple way. You know, you get it to a particular demographic. It's not something intrinsic to the creative process or to the imaginative reading process. You know, so I think we've got to loosen up about genres, and I think that's where we are at the moment. I think it's an exciting time. I think the parameters of what is thought to be literary fiction, I think, are shifting now. You know, people who are supposed to, you know, undeniably, you know, great literary writers, people like Margaret Atwood or, you know, David Mitchell from Britain, you know, they delve into everything and mix everything, whatever they need to create, you know, great stories.
Okay, let me take your great flying machine that you put in print on pages, and then this is going to be your third novel that's going to be adapted into a film. So Never Let Me Go and The Remains of the Day. How effective? Your great flying machine's there. How effective do you think someone who takes over your great flying machine and puts it on the screen? How effective do you think the adaptations have been to carry on to get at the heart of what you're really trying to say in your books?
Well, I don't know yet whether whether we'll have a film with The Buried Giant. I'm very optimistic because one of the most extraordinary movie producers working now, Scott Rudin, has had the option for about a year, and he has a very imaginative approach. And so if anyone can do it well, I think Scott will be able to do it well. So I'm optimistic, but the Rudin movies is you never count on anything, you know. Even when the film is made, you know, nobody may see it. So you know, you never sit back and say, yes, you know, it's happened until it opens at the Toronto Film Festival or something like that. Sure. The two movies that have been made from my books, I think I've been fantastically lucky. They've been more or less 100% positive experiences for me.
Did you get really involved in them?
No, I think I was about to go on to say this. I think it's partly because I don't get too involved. You know, I think I know some authors like to get quite involved in the creative process. You know, I've worked as a screenwriter as well, and I kind of think, by and large, that's not a good idea. You know, I think it's a mistake to think of a film version of a novel as a translation, you know, in the way that you might think of the French version of a novel or whatever. I mean, I don't think that the role of the filmmakers is to translate the novel. You know, so how
do you see their role?
I think they're taking your novel as raw material to create a very different piece of work. It has to be a very different piece of work because cinema, you know, tells its stories in such a different way. You know. And if you've worked in the two mediums, I mean, you know, that becomes blindingly obvious. You know, and so I think I always feel I'm the worst person in a way to bring that kind of dispassionate, cold, quite ruthless eye to this raw material. You know, I'm just too involved with the raw material. I'm not going to be able to say, you know, let's just change that, let's cut all of that. You know, also, I'm not a very good screenwriter. That's the other reason.
Is that true? You think that of yourself, that you're not a very good screenwriter?
I think I'm a much better novelist than I am a screenwriter. It's only because of my reputation as a novelist that people keep asking me, do you want to have a go at writing this?
Okay, well, let me pick up on that, because
near a movie. Yeah.
Okay, but you know, TV now is sort of seen as a new novel with all this prestige television and the Wire, Black Mirror, which you're familiar with in Britain. I mean, you feel no temptation to write for the smaller screen?
The problem, no, I do. I think what's happening in television is really exciting. You know, I think that the idea of a long form film medium is one of the really exciting things that's happened at the moment. I personally now, you know, I'm 60 years old now. You know, I've been like a movie fan all my life. You know, I've been trying to write kind of movie screenplays, you know, alongside my novels for most of my career. So those two things I'm kind of familiar with. I don't know if I can learn this long form TV form. I mean, I think it is something quite different to tell a story in that way, you know, over many hours in different episodes. I think it is something quite different again. Yeah, I think it's very exciting. I think one of the big challenges that faces any writer that's writing in that long form is apart from the obvious ones, so, you know, cohesion and so on, is I think is to resist the temptation to just make the earlier episodes so gripping, you know, when you don't even know how you're going to resolve the issues. Because I think I think that's the recurring problem with a lot of these things. The priority is so much to grip the audience in the earlier episodes that the latter episodes are a real letdown. There's no proper earned payoff. And I think that's bad for storytelling. You know, people feel cheated and manipulated, and that's something you can't get away with in movies, because, you know, people watch those movies in one sitting. You know, you can get away with it almost in television, because if you've got an audience hooked for weeks and weeks and weeks, you're a success. It doesn't matter if the resolution is rubbish. You know? Right. And that's the danger. You know, but I think in terms of, if we want to keep up a serious storytelling tradition, I think it's very important as a culture that we do, in whatever form, whatever medium that we choose. I mean, the stories have to be genuine. They're not just audience manipulation vehicles. You know, they have to actually reveal proper truths in some kind of way for people to really value them as something more than just entertainment that passes the time. Okay, so you brought up your age. I mean, I'm not trying to be ageist here, but I just want to bring up a picture, because this is from 30 years ago, I think, just over 30 years. So Granta named you one of Britain's 20 most promising young writers at the time, along with, there you are, down the bottom there. That's me sitting on the floor next to the stripy bag. There you are, yeah. Very fashionable then, okay. I have a little moustache. So Martin Amis is on that list, Ian McEwan, others on that. Do you remember what it felt like at the time, being on that list, with so many other greats? Well, you have to remember that most of us were unknown at the time. I think the two writers who were known at that point were Martin Amis and Ian McEwan. And not in anything, you know, they weren't like mega famous. Yeah, known how they are now, yeah. People who knew about literature, you know, they were exciting young writers, you know. I think it's, yeah, and Salman Rushdie, who's not in that photograph because he was on tour somewhere. I mean, he had come from nowhere with this book, Midnight's Children, one of the great, you know, modern novels. So those three were heard, or the rest of us weren't. Nobody thought at the time that this was this was some sort of generation as such. You know, it was just a bunch of young writers. You know, it's only after the fact that people look back and said, oh, you know, so many you know, very good writers have come from that generation. I don't know if we think of ourselves as a generation or not. I mean. I don't know if we have that much in common, but I'm very proud to have been in that photograph. You know, I was the youngest as well. I was a baby. Yeah, I was the baby of that group. Yeah, I guess hindsight, you know, it all seems different. But you know, whoever decided to pull you guys all together had some pretty good. Well, one thing I'll say about that, though, I mean, you described them as the most promising writers, but the cutoff age was 40. And this is something I come back to over and over again. I think there's a great danger in having a kind of a literary climate that suggests that novelists who are 38, 39 are still at the kind of apprentice stage because of by virtue of their age. Because the truth is, for novelists, I think you have to remember that War and Peace, Ulysses, all these great books, all of Franz Kafka's books, most of the books written by the great American writers of the early part of the 20th century, they're all written by writers in their 30s and their early 40s. I mean, people like Faulkner or Fitzgerald, Hemingway. I mean, nobody really pays much attention to what they wrote after their mid-40s. The danger about thinking about writers in their 30s as promising is that the writers become a little complacent about time. They think they've got plenty of time, they're going to write their masterpiece in 20, 30 years' time. That's a very dangerous way to think, because the reality is you're most likely to write your masterpiece in your mid-30s. And so that's what I don't like about that kind of way of thinking, and having young writers' prizes. Young writers' prizes are okay if you make the cutoff age, maybe 27 or something. But I don't like to encourage. If I see young writers, or writers in their 30s, I want to say to them, go for it now.
Right.
If you're going to starve in the garret to write your masterpiece, do it now.
All right. I guess someone could argue, that with age comes experience. And so I ask you this question. I mean, do you have an idea or a theory as to what role age plays in terms of shaping the qualities of someone's writing?
Well, this is something I'm obliged to think about now that I've turned 60.
Right.
And I've been actually kind of, I can't help but look at writers who are slightly older than me to see what they're doing well and what they're doing less well. And not just writers. I've been looking at musicians, filmmakers, and this whole question of late style is really interesting. And there seems to be a number of kind of models I've spotted. One is, well, since we're in Canada, let's just stick with Canadian artists.
Okay.
You can think about, say somebody like Neil Young on the one hand and Leonard Cohen on the other, right? Now, Neil Young, right, with a few little exceptions, I mean, he basically does what he always did, he just carries on doing what he did. I would say he does what I would call the John McEnroe model. Because if you're that good at your peak, even if you decline a little bit, you're still pretty good. So you might as well just carry on doing the same thing.
Sure.
Right. So that's one model. But there are dangers of that. There are dangers of that. Then you have the kind of the person who kind of rather like let's just think about say Cormac McCarthy's The Road, or Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, or Philip Roth's Nemesis. These kind of short, very concise, pared down, simple distillations of stuff that you're working through earlier in your career. The kind of late statements, or Garcia Marquez's Chronicle of a Death Foretold. There's something appealing about that. You've wrestled with all this stuff, and towards the end of your career, you've pared it down to what you want to say, a distillation. That's another model but I rather like looking at people like Leonard Cohen. There's another. I think there's a third way of looking at late style, where you actually embrace the aging experience. I think Leonard Cohen's latest album is probably his greatest album since I'm Your Man.
Many agree with you, yes.
And what's interesting is that he absolutely, I mean, it's about having got old. It's about, it has some of the sadnesses, but the happinesses. It has the nostalgia, the regrets. It's rich with the perspective of age, old age. I think Dylan did it a number of years ago with that magnificent album called Time Out of Mind. It's a way of kind of actually embracing the aging process and saying, actually, there's something really rich. There's something new to work with here. This is an essential part of the human experience. I'm going to work with it. And that often results in something that's not necessarily concise. It's not a summary of the work that's been done thus far. It's something new. You're on new territory. It often tends to be quite loose. it often involves wanting to merge into a continuity in your culture, that you come in a long line of kind of ancient artists, and you know, you can blend in with them. You're part of a tradition, but you know, it's all about, you know, longing and regret and acceptance and bitterness and anger, all the confusion of getting older. But it's a really rich and important part of the human experience. You know, let's go there and look at it fully.
And as you think about your future, I mean, do you see yourself being the Cohen or the Dylan or the John McEnroe? Do you look to sort of where you may be headed that way?
As I say, I like the Leonard Cohen model. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you're going to an interesting place, if I'm lucky, I'll go there to old age. You know, I hope I make it to old age. I want to write about it. You know, it'll be an interesting and profound planet. You know, childhood is endlessly fascinating. I think old age should be endlessly fascinating. Why not have us report from it and write about it and try and make, you know, good art out of it.
Right. I want to go to a young writer again, so we'll kind of skip around on the age spectrum at least. So last summer we did an interview with Ben Tarnoff, who wrote a book called The Bohemians, looking at Twain and other 19th century American literature. We'll play a little tape. This is Ben Tarnoff discussing the state of literature in the 21st century.
There are still a lot of people writing really great literary fiction and literary nonfiction. You know, I think it's important to keep in mind that the culture has grown. I mean, the media landscape has become much more crowded, but print and the written word has an important place in it. I think the point is, and I think a lot of writers want to dispute this, is just that that place isn't as central as it once was. You know, it exists a little bit more at the margins today. But people still write great novels and people still read them. And I think that experience will be just as true 50 years from now.
He might be on a list somewhere as one of the young writers who we should keep an eye out for. But do you agree with Ben Tarnoff there, Kazuo? I mean, is print and the written word as central as it once was? We hear this debate all the time sort of being thrown out there.
I think it still is. I mean, no, obviously Ben has a very good point there. There are many other things competing for our attention. But I think the written word, I'll qualify that when I say, I slightly disagree with Ben. He is right, probably, but I would say the written word is still central as long as it's allied to the cinema. At the moment, and to some extent television. You know, as long as that alliance, let's just call it, you know, cinema, including the big, you know, big TV series. But, that alliance, I think, is very powerful and remains very powerful today. You know, just even in terms of, you know, marketing clout, the amount of attention it gets. I mean, every week there is a story that is unleashed with all the razzmatazz and power of the Hollywood marketing engine behind it, and it's based on a novel. You know, sometimes it's based on a contemporary novel, sometimes it's based on a classic novel. But I mean, you know, you don't go for very long without something like that happening. So, and then everyone's reading the novel, everyone's watching the movie, everyone's talking about that story. That, you know, whatever that story is, that originated in somebody's study on a computer or on a piece of paper, is out there in an almighty kind of way. It's become part of the furniture of how we think and imagine. You know, and sometimes it's a thriller, sometimes it's a literary book. You know, but it seems to me it's still pretty central. You know, I'm not quite sure what else is more central. One of the great sadnesses for me is that I think music culture has fragmented. I mean, when I was growing up, I mean, music culture was absolutely central to people of my generation. To me, it seems it's the music culture that's fragmented and gone to the margins. You know, but it seems to me storytelling, based on often on books, sometimes non-fiction books, with that very powerful alliance with cinema, I think is still dominant. And whenever we think of, you know, what are the dominant things culturally that we've had, I mean, often it's to do with that alliance of the novel that's turned into a movie and everyone's reading the novel as well. You know.
I have to let you go in just a minute, but I don't want to do so without saying, you know, fans of yours waited a decade for this, and you made the case why it took you longer finding the right setting and all of that. Do we have to wait another 10 years to get another novel from you?
Well,
Who
I
knows?
hope no, but you know, well, it depends. I mean, you know, I don't see that there's a problem about quantity of books out there. You know, so I don't want to. I don't want to just, you know, produce a book because there's some sort of problem about not enough books.
No,
out there.
I think I'm trying to make the point that people want to read what you have to say.
Yeah, so I can only produce something if I think it's going to, even in a very humble way, it's going to change the landscape slightly. It's going to change the skyline of the world of books in a tiny little way. You know, then it's worth producing a book. But I mean, there's enough books out there. It depends on other factors, like you know, like my wife. You know, part of the reason that it's been so long between novels is that my wife made me abandon an earlier draft of The Buried Giant. She said it just, you know, I just had to start again from scratch. You know?
Right.
So I have this very strict wife who has been my first editor ever since before I started to write. You know, when I first started to attempt fiction as a young man. She was the person who kind of looking at it saying, so you think you can be a writer, do you? You know, in that case, why have you written this? You know? And she still looks at my work in that kind of way. In her mind, I'm still this young upstart who's having a go at writing. Okay, so it depends to some extent on what she allows me to publish.
Fair enough. And like a great editor, maybe she's just saying, it's not ready yet. Go back and write again.
I think we all need good editors, whether we're married to them or whether we're professionally tied to them. And I'm lucky to have her and a number of very good professional people, agents and editors who aren't afraid to be frank when they need to be.
Congrats on this book. It's an interesting read. It pulls out lots of different thoughts and themes, and I thank you for joining us for the last couple nights.
Well, thank you very much indeed. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.